You mentioned your wife, Candace Owens, obviously a very big name, very big career. What was it like for you to watch Candace take on that role of motherhood and become a mom? What's doing, everybody? I'm Alec Lace. Thank you for watching First Class Fatherhood. Today's guest on the podcast is George Farmer. George Farmer is the CEO of Parler. He and his wife, Candace Owens, are expecting their second child real soon, next month. I'm excited to have him on the podcast today, so get down there, smack the subscribe button, tap the like, and let's jump into it right now with George Farmer on First Class Fatherhood. Joining me now, First Class Father, George Farmer. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
Thanks very much. Good to be here.
All right, let's start right here. How many kids do you have? How old?
Just the one, Alec. And he is 18 months. And another one on the way, about to arrive in literally like less than a month. So about 3 weeks, I think now. So.
Wow, very exciting stuff. Is your son ready to become a big brother here or what?
You know what? He's a little domestic terrorist. He's running around causing complete chaos. I don't think he knows that he's got a little sister on the way just yet. So I think he's like feeling out, why is mommy getting a bit bigger than normal? I think there's a few questions in his mind, but he's going to be. I think he's going to be a good big brother. I think it's going to take a little bit of getting used to.
Yeah, be in for a little shock for sure. All right, if you could, George, please just take a minute here to hit my listeners with a little bit about your background and what you do.
Sure. Well, Alec, I run a company called Parler, which is a social media company focused on free speech. I used to be in financial services. I worked in London. Obviously, I'm English. I worked in London and financial services for about 10 years before I moved over to the States, got married in 2019. Lived in DC for a couple of years, helped my wife set up her foundation, and then we moved down to Nashville, Tennessee when she took up a job down here. I then moved to become CEO of Parler last year, about the beginning of last year, and have run that for about 18 months now. So almost in tandem with how old my boy is, was basically when I stepped into Parler and took over running that. And otherwise, English born and bred, raised in London, have an excellent dad of my own who still lives there, and otherwise, just enjoying the good life in Tennessee, enjoying life in the volunteer state.
Yeah, very cool. And so take me back then. I know it's not that long ago, but how did the experience of becoming a father kind of change your perspective on life?
Yeah, it's actually a funny thing because being English, I'm more of an evolutionary kind of character than a revolutionary kind of character. You Americans are the revolutionaries, whereas British, we're like the evolutionary. So when I first became a dad, I would say that the change was imperceptible. It was kind of like there was suddenly this creature that needed attention, love, and care, and I wanted to love it and I wanted to care for it. And then, he developed into a person and developed into this like living, breathing, characterful personality. And in doing so, I think it made me very aware that I was mortal, I think, in many ways. I think when you're a young man in your 20s, you can probably be perceived as being kind of like the king of the world. You can do your own thing. You can become sort of a master of your own little universe. And then suddenly you've got this amazing life before you, which is totally dependent upon you. And not only that, but also is the generation after you. And suddenly all of those perceptions that you had in your 20s get smashed, and suddenly you realize that A, I'm going to die, B, there's a generation after me which is going to take on the legacy that I leave behind, and C, that actually life is so much richer when you're not the master of your own universe, when you actually do have dependents and a family and relationships around you which really mean something.
Yeah, very well said, George. And so you said it coincides too with you becoming the CEO of Parler. What have been some of the challenges for you taking on the role of CEO while being a young new dad yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't wish last year on my worst enemy. Let's put it like that. It was a tough one. There's no doubt about it. We moved states. It was my third move or fourth move in 2 years, 3 years. I forget now. We moved states, we moved cities. I became a dad. I took on a new job. Kind of all the things that they tell you not to do all at once, I did all at once. My wife was taking on a new job as well. So, that was kind of pretty hectic, pretty busy. It was definitely a challenging year. not much sleep, kind of 100-hour weeks, whether it'll be in the workplace and then outside of the workplace, things were pretty crazy. Getting used to being a dad for the first time. I mean, there are things that obviously you can just never predict. Your reaction when your kid is sick for the first time. It's just, every parent tells you it's the same thing. And when you hear about it, my standard reaction is, that will never happen to me. And then as soon as it happens to me, it's like panic, rushing, like, what do we do? Where do we take him? Does he need to go to the hospital? It's like, he's got a small fever. Do we need to take him to the hospital? So I was kind of like, getting used to all of that at the same time as trying to run Parler. It was a pretty challenging year as a whole. I would say that it got better throughout the year, just as we found our feet more. We were still building our home. There was a lot going on. But now settled into a cadence, have a rhythm of life down here, which is fantastic. He's obviously, becoming a small boy, toddler, very advanced in terms of running around, physical activity, walking backwards, doing backflips as far as I'm concerned. He's just sort of begun talking pretty well, kind of more conversant, conversational with us, which is great. And life is becoming more settled down here.
Yeah, very cool. And I know you mentioned too, you had a good father growing up. Now, is your parents if still with us, and are they overseas or are they here in the States? And what kind of support system do you guys have so far into this?
Yeah, my parents are overseas. They're in the UK. We actually don't have many family down here, to be honest. So we found ourselves doing a lot of the work ourselves. We pretty much all the kind of, I mean, we have a nanny, who obviously helps out, which is very useful and very much appreciated. But we didn't have really any help from family nearby because there just isn't any. Candace's family lives all over the country. My family live overseas. I have one sister who lives in England. I have one sister who lives in Japan, and my parents who live in London. So, not much help. But, that kind of made it all the more rewarding, I guess, because you're thrown into those challenges and you're thrown into them in the deep end, trying to figure out all the answers. It does mean that I think the second time round now with number 2 on her way, we are probably less daunted by it. I think that we're just kind of like more ready for it. We don't think that there are many challenges that we haven't yet lived up to or attacked. So I'm not so worried about number 2 as I was kind of nervous about number 1, I guess.
Yeah, I can hear you on that. We got 4 over here, and our biggest challenge was going from 2 to 3. And just like you, I mean, my parents both passed away before I became a father myself, and my wife's parents are divorced and estranged, and they're not involved in her life. So it was always just me and her to kind of lean on one another, which was good in a lot of ways, presented some challenges in a lot of ways. But we never had that in-law worry that a lot of people have to deal with in these situations. And you mentioned your wife, Candace Owens, obviously a very big name, very big career. What was it like for you to watch Candace take on that role of motherhood and become a mom?
It was fascinating to watch. I mean, for those who would argue in society that men and women are, have no differences, it all can be the same or whatever. I mean, they couldn't be more wrong. And I mean, the example of parenthood for both of us changed us both in ways that we just didn't imagine at the first, before we began this journey together. I think for her, it was, motherhood just brings out the best in women. I mean, it just does. It's just a fantastic thing to see. They become homemakers. They become people who, have so much more tenderness in them. I think it allows them to love more. That's not to say they didn't love beforehand. And there are plenty of women who don't have kids who are incredibly loving and wonderful and incredible women. But it's just that motherhood is so complementary. There's no doubt about it. And, she really blossomed into that role, I think, of being a mother. In the same way that being a father for me, I suddenly started thinking about college funds and life insurance and all this kind of stuff. It's just like dads and mums have different things they think about, but we're all planning together now to build this family unit for the rest of our lives. And that's incredibly rewarding for the two of us.
Yeah, it's so exciting, George. You're so right. And I'm just curious, too, because obviously your wife is a big name figure. And listen, whenever I have conservative dads on the podcast here, I get absolutely smacked on the social media. The political world is just a vicious world. And I know she plays in that world. What is it like? Is that ever a distraction for you guys wanting to go out, have a nice family day at the park? Are there always that kind of concerns for you as a father to kind of worry that extra step to protect your family just because of the kind of work that she's involved with?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a byproduct of the world we're in these days, the hyper-partisan political nature that we live in. We have around-the-clock security, and obviously it's just something that, needs to be dealt with given the profile that she keeps in the political spectrum and the profile that both of us kind of are engaged with. I hesitate to say this, I guess, a little bit, but I don't think we've quite crossed that Rubicon where children of well-known figures have become the targets. I think that has occasionally happened, but it seems to be pretty infrequently. The media as a whole, I think it's almost like one of the last pieces of hallowed ground for the media, that they don't kind of cross that river and that bridge and start targeting people's children. Certainly when I grew up in the UK, it was always considered to be like the untouchable topic. The media never went after politicians' kids unless they were 18 plus, right? And I think over here it's kind of been the same a little bit. We've never really found that much attention, I guess, on our family life, more on the kind of political lives, I guess, that the two of us respectively lead. So we can enjoy days out, and down here in Tennessee, there's obviously a lot of friends and allies as a state which generally is more conservative than up north where we used to live. So we appreciate that, and we value the time that we have together down here.
Yeah, great stuff. And then jumping back into what you do here with Parler, obviously the social media landscape is changing. We got Elon Musk jumping in here, buying Twitter, not buying Twitter, whatever's going on with him. We have President Trump started the Truth Social. So where does that fit into all this? What has changed since you've taken over Parler, and what does the future of it look like?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, I'll start at the end and work backwards. So I think from what's changed at Parler, so the company we inherited, I say we, the management C-suite of this business, which as it stands now is totally different to the one that existed beforehand. The company that we inherited was not really much of a company. It was destroyed by the deplatforming. It was a tech stack which didn't work. There was huge infrastructure issues with the business. Operationally, from a corporate perspective, the business was a mess. From a product roadmap perspective, there was no product roadmap. The business was a complete bomb site in many ways. Most of 2021 was spent rebuilding the business, putting it back into order, putting it back into good shape, rebuilding the full tech stack, putting in place a corporate structure, closing a financing round, which we did in December. Shrinking the business. Unfortunately, we had to let people go. That was just a reality of the situation at the time. But now, having closed that financing round in December and having got the business back into good shape, we've been able to now build back. Ironically enough, build back better. Let's put it like that. But we've hired now quite a few more engineers. We've almost doubled the size of headcount in the business. Selectively hiring into engineering, selectively hiring into marketing, selectively hiring into product, kind of the three main areas with the occasional scattering of hires elsewhere. And then we've been able to rebuild the technology. We now have a great architecture, an API-based architecture, which, insulates the business from huge cataclysmic events like we had with AWS when they deplatformed us at the beginning of last year. And so, Parler's role will always be a free speech platform, but now we're adding more to it, right? So now we started at the end of last year adding this crypto element to it. We've got a big NFT product these days, which we're offering to our consumers. We've worked with Melania Trump on that. That's obviously a very well-known fact. She's, out in the market. Having said this, we've worked with a couple of other people, the Babylon Bee. We've worked with, a couple of other influencers. We've got more product releases coming out, some very exciting ones coming out over the summer. And then we've also, moving into the infrastructure space, we're doing more in that kind of area. We're trying to move into a little bit more of a B2B style business where we're providing kind of Parler as a technology services company, providing more service to consumers, to businesses, not just consumers, not just retail consumers, but business consumers as well. So we're doing more of that licensing technology We have a very innovative technology department as a whole. We have 20 engineers on payroll. They produce incredible content and product and technology behind Parler, which most people don't necessarily see. And so we're sort of starting to think about expanding and licensing that more to business consumers out there. I would say that kind of answers to some extent also the question, where does Parler fit? Parler fits as a free speech platform, as a business which is focused on being uncancelable, but at the same time it also helps add more strings to our bow than just being what I call a free speech business, right? A free speech business, is a business which is predicated just on free speech, and basically, like Elon Musk walks in the room and, all the canaries die, as a wise man once said to me. So, it's kind of one of these things where if you're just focused on social media, you leave yourself open to that attack from Elon Musk. He's not trying to attack us. Obviously, he's just trying to buy Twitter, but that obviously does expose that business sector. We have added much more diversity to our product offering. We now have a crypto offering. We have an infrastructure offering. We have a social media offering. There's a lot more diversity to the Parler brand now than there was, say 2 years ago. In regards to the competition, Elon, I wish him all the best with his purchase of Twitter. I've said this before in the media. I think that, I was very skeptical of the deal when it was first announced, just because the way the market reacted, the way the share price reacted, didn't seem to me like a company which was going to get bought. I was in finance for a while. I kind of, pretty familiar with merger math, and it didn't make any sense how the share price was reacting. Obviously, we've now seen that the whole deal is falling to pieces. I don't know what his end game is there. Maybe it's just to get a better price. Maybe it's that, the widespread sell-off in the tech sector has meant that he's actually reevaluated the whole thing. Who knows? Only he does. And then Truth and all the other competitive platforms, I welcome competition to the space. I think let the best platform win in many ways. And we have a great platform, and we just released a whole lot of updates yesterday, and we've got more updates coming out next week and before the end of the month. And I'm quite keen to have a competitive battle in some ways with some of our competition, because I think that we would win that fight. And especially now that we have more products on the roadmap than before. But generally speaking, I think that this sector is getting a lot more attention now than ever has done before. Conservative, quote unquote, conservative media is getting a lot more attention. That's both because Elon has brought that to the forefront by saying, this censorship is a real issue. And I think that that's something we all can be grateful for, because he's really brought that to the forefront. And secondly, I think that the space as a whole is getting more attention just because there are more platforms in it. And that's a good thing. So I'm excited for our business model going forward, and I think we've got a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think it is a good thing. I think the competition is good because it will, it's going to create innovation. Guys are going to be looking to expand, build, change, develop, just because they know that the competition is right behind them. So I think it's a good thing. And obviously, the free speech is a great part of this. The censorship has gotten out of control. So hopefully this forces some of these other companies, too, to reevaluate what they're. I know I did an interview with Dinesh D'Souza, got banned on YouTube, banned on TikTok. It's like, sometimes you get a little sick and tired of being sick and tired of that stuff with all the censoring. So hopefully, this will change the landscape of it and make it a fair playing field for everybody. So applaud you guys for what you're doing over at Parler. And then bringing it back into you as a father here, what would you consider, George, to be the top values that you hope to instill in your kids growing up?
Great question. I mean, I would say a fear of God. The Bible says the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And I think that's the truth. And I think that fear of God is so important. Fearing God, not man, is so important. Like, remembering that one is answerable to God and not answerable to man at the end of the day will be a much more powerful motivating factor for you than worrying about what the latest trend is or being answerable to your social peers, right? So that's number one. I would say, everything roots from that. Everything roots from that fear of God, because I would say number two would be honesty. Honesty and transparency, both with yourself, apart from anything else. I think being honest with yourself is so crucial. The greatest fights that I've had in my own life are when I've not been honest with myself, tried to either force myself to be something I'm not, or, being dishonest, period, just lying, whether one lies to oneself, whether one wants to believe something that isn't true. And I don't mean like telling her, I brush my teeth. No, I didn't brush my teeth. I mean something like, exaggerating one's own potential, or believing something to be true when you know in your heart of hearts that it probably isn't, right? Or over-egging one's own ability. All of these things are classic cases of being dishonest with oneself and others, right? And so being honest about one's own ability, limitations, and skill set is absolutely crucial. And then number 3, I would say, love for one's fellow man in many ways. And I think, again, that stems from a fear of God. Love one's neighbor as oneself. And I think that those are crucial. I mean, the Bible also says to love justice and walk humbly, and love mercy and walk with God. And I think that that's absolutely crucial. So love for one's fellow man, love for each other. That's how we build a better society at the end of the day. One of the troubles things about social media is that you've just got platforms which are overrun with hatred and with viciousness and anger. And it's just so brutal in many ways to read it the whole time. And I think that if we could take a step back and actually return to some level of civil discourse, that has to be driven by a love for one's fellow man and a desire to see people, improve their lives and improve their lot. And I think that that's something that generally conservatives are much better at than liberals, who increasingly are moving down the kind of like shout louder until the other person doesn't speak anymore. And I think that that's a troubling path to go down. So those are kind of the values that I would try and instill in my son, or I'm trying to instill in my son. I think that those would be the things that I would tell him to hark on.
Yeah, that's awesome, Georgia. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm a faith-based guy myself, and I often talk on this show all the time about the fatherless crisis that we got going on. We have removed the father from the house, and we've removed our heavenly father from our society. And I think those two things make a combination that has really just destroyed our country here. And that's what's the revolving door of all these other social issues that we're trying to solve. At the root of it, it's the family units, it's the heavenly father. So if we can get back to that, and I'm kind of curious for you, I know, what is it like for you in the United States here? We lead the world in fatherless households. It's an epidemic here in the U.S. We got 1 in 4 kids growing up without a father in their home. And all the stats, I'm sure you're familiar with them. I know Kansas speaks on this. They are alarming. What is it like overseas there in Europe? Are they having a similar fatherless crisis? Is this an epidemic over there the way we see it over here? And what is your take on the crisis itself?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it is an epidemic overseas. I think it's an epidemic in all Western cultures, if I'm honest. Maybe it's not as advanced. I don't know the figures off the top of my head for mainland Europe. I mean, I know that the UK, has similar numbers to the US. Maybe not as advanced in some ethnic minorities as they are over here. I know Candace speaks about that very frequently. The fatherless absent rate in the Black community is very, very high in America. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the same in Britain. The divorce rate in Britain is going up. That has been the case for quite some time, although I think it may have arrested now, actually. The last time I checked, my dad actually does a lot of work on family policy in the UK, and it's one of his biggest topics. I mean, it's probably his biggest topic that he talks about in Parliament. He's a member of the House of Lords, and I mean, I would say that yes, you're quite right. I mean, the removal of the father from the home is awful, because I can see that if I wasn't here the whole time, or at least if I wasn't here as a father, the knock-on impact that would have both on my son and on my wife would be huge, because there's a mutual symbiosis. The reason the family unit exists is to build that symbiosis, that symbiotic relationship between man and woman, which helps bring up children and which helps bring love and the kind of counterbalancing natures of the two, which help promote growth and stimulation in a child. There are things that I will never be interested in. I will never be interested in wallpaper. I will never be interested in like designing a child's room, right? It's just not, but my wife finds that fascinating. Equally, she will never be interested in life insurance policies. It's just, there's just things which we don't do together. And of course, I'm generalizing here, but the generalization to some extent proves a point, which is just that there's a symbiotic relationship between man and woman, and you need both. And one of the tragedies of Western society is that we've tried to say that women can be men, and women are equal to men. Why would you want to be equal to a man? I mean, it's one of the points I always say. Why would you want that? Like men have a hard drinking, kind of testosterone filled existence. Yeah, and of course there are hazards and advantages, but it also has massive disadvantages. Much higher rate of workplace fatality, higher rate of heart attacks, higher rate of alcoholism, higher rate of drug abuse. I mean, it's just, you name it. Men have got their own troubles. You don't want to be the same as men, and the mutual respect for the sexes has been lost, and that's the problem. The mutual respect for the unique roles that each sex has been lost. And removing the father from the home for some reason was the mantra of the kind of 70s feminist movement. And that has obviously had knock-on impacts for a generation. And that's a real tragedy. Coming back to the faith point, politics sits downstream of culture. Culture sits downstream of faith, and that's the kind of segment to that Andrew Breitbart quotation, which, is so important. You need faith in the home, because without faith, you have to argue, where are you getting your values from? You're getting your values from yourself. Well, at the end of the day, we all fail. We're all human, we're all fallible. So if you're getting your values from yourself, ultimately, you won't win, right? You need something higher than you to get your values from. And that ultimate higher value is God.
Yeah, very well said. And I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm curious too here now, you got your little guy there. What kind of bedtime routine you have going on? Are you a storybook teller, a reader? Are you a lullaby guy? How does the bedtime routine looking like for you so far here into this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixture. He's got more interested in storybooks over the past year and a half. So initially, storybooks were kind of more interesting for just, he would sort of grab them and flick to the end and then throw the book across the room. And I was like, okay, so this is where we are with storybooks. He's now kind of got interested in them. And so he's much more willing to sit in my lap and to take 10 minutes to read a storybook and to kind of figure out what's going on there. He still takes a bottle at night because, he likes the soothing nature of it. So, and then when he does that, he gets a lullaby as well. And then that puts him into a pretty good routine for going down. But otherwise, I tend to kind of run around with him a little bit beforehand. He's pretty crazy at that point. The kind of excited pre-bed stage. So he normally gets about 20 minutes of run around time with me, and then after that, either a story or a lullaby, and then goes down.
Very cool. Yeah, you sound like you can belt out a Beatles number or two there. So
yeah, of course, definitely what I'm saying.
All right, last thing I want to hit you with here, George. I love to ask all the dads that I get on the podcast, what type of advice do you have for that new dad or for that about to be father who's out there listening?
I would say, get ready to give a bit of yourself up, and get ready to hand over control of your life to a force which is both greater and more rewarding than yourself. Because I think that too often in our society, and you're seeing this with men getting older before they have kids, the habits become more entrenched. The ability to see outside of self becomes more entrenched. And I think that when you get to that stage where you're like, well, this is my habit, this is what I like to do. As men, we can be quite selfish. I mean, all people can be selfish, but men are often more selfish, I find, than women. And that means that, we want that routine. We like what we do. We like to get up when we want to get up in the morning. We like to have coffee. We like to do whatever we want to do, hang out with the boys. Get ready to give that up, because you're about to embark on a journey which is so much more rewarding and fulfilling than whatever it is you had in your life beforehand. And it's one of the things that I often say, I wish I'd started on this journey earlier. And actually I was one of the youngest of my friends to have kids. A few more of them are having kids now or have kids in the oven. But I would say that, if I'd started earlier, I would have just found that reward more enjoyable even earlier, and it's not something that you should put off, and get ready to give a little bit of yourself up and get much more in return.
Yeah, very well said. I love the message. This has been a lot of fun for me. I got to say, George Farmer, you're a first class father all the way. And thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time here on First Class Fatherhood.
Thanks very much. It was a pleasure to be here.